You've carried the weight of your service long after you took off the uniform. The sleepless nights, the constant edge, the feeling that no one around you really gets it. What if there was a way to start healing, not just surviving, but actually feeling like yourself again? And today we're going to sit down with Army veteran and licensed counselor Healey. She's been where you are, and she spent nearly 2 decades helping veterans break free from anxiety, PTSD, and the stress that holds them back. If you're looking for practical strategies and a fresh perspective on mental health, this episode is for you. So stay with us, and don't forget, visit driveonpodcast.com/subscribe to get my top 5 episodes sent straight to your inbox. So let's get into it. Healey, welcome to the show. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as an Army veteran and now professional counselor, could you share with us the kind of unique perspective that you bring to the table in the mental health field, particularly within the military community?
Well, yes, I have my expertise, and then I did serve in the military. So it does kind of help when talking with, because there is certain lingo, as we know, in the military that maybe not everybody will understand. But also, it is interesting that, at least I've always thought about the hardest part of my transitioning was just recognizing that I had the freedom to make decisions from that point forward. And that was really hard to get out of that. Like if I wanted to go out of town, you don't have to request permission from somebody. And it was a really hard thing, just that it's all encompassing of your life, and you don't always realize that, and it's quite the adjustment to get out, and just do things differently. So just understanding that whole perspective, I think, is helpful when I see military members, and oftentimes, because I've got, that I was served in the military on my website, and so sometimes people they go, okay, at least she kind of knows. I don't have all the experiences everybody's had, but at least I know some of the foundational military stuff.
Right, and I think that's important. And I don't think anybody expects, a counselor or therapist that they are going to have all the experiences that they've had, because nobody's had the same experiences, right? I mean, even two people who have served in combat had different experiences. Some might have, served many, many days in a row in combat situations, and some people may have just had, one or two little small skirmishes, and not to downplay those at all. Those are still significant events, but they're two different sides of the combat scenario there, right? And so,
Right.
I don't think anybody expects that you're going to have the exact same experience. As a matter of fact, I'd hope nobody had the same experiences as
Right.
me or as
They
some
probably
other people,
wouldn't.
because those are terrible. Like I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
Right.
But it is important, I think, for some people, anyways, that you do have some background knowledge on the military. So, like you said, some of the lingo, some of the just basic ways that we interact with each other. And I found through doing this podcast that conversations that I'll have with veterans versus some of the civilians that I have on the show just come off a whole lot easier. Like by the end of the episode, like you and I, we hadn't really spoken prior to this episode, short of maybe 5 minutes or so before we hit record. But by the end of the episode, in most cases, I feel like I've known the person for quite some time, because we have that shared connection. And so I would imagine that from a counseling perspective, it makes it a lot easier to hit the ground running, as opposed to now I got to build the trust with the person and get that rapport and all that kind of stuff built up. In this case, you already have that background, and that I would imagine makes it a little bit easier, right?
Yeah, because I think that, especially being in the military, you do feel a certain connection with, you may not have served with them, but technically you have. Like, we have all signed on that line saying we're willing to give our life for our country. That does create a certain camaraderie of like, yeah, we're brothers and sisters,
Yeah,
and
right.
yeah, and how the military can, we get especially. I mean, I went in when I was 17. A lot of your identity gets tied up in that, and so when you get out, like that's just a whole nother thing too. Of like, this is a whole part of who I was. Like people didn't call me by my first. Well, friends did, but people didn't call me by my first name. They called
Right.
me by my last. Like it's a whole, and by our rank, and so it's just a whole identity thing, and it's hard to explain that to people who haven't served, but those who serve, they get it like right off the bat, like we know. We understand.
Yeah, and the way I think I can maybe make it make sense for the folks maybe who haven't served and they're kind of scratching their head like I don't get it, like what, I don't understand why it's like that. If you were to go visit another country and you're the only American in this country that's completely foreign to you, their culture is different, their language is different, the food and everything about the area that you're in is different from what you are used to back home. And then you see this guy in blue jeans and a ball cap and t-shirt, sneakers and stuff walking down the street, and you're like, okay, that's an American. I'm gonna go latch onto that person because we don't even know each other, but you and we're gonna be best friends for the duration of this trip, right? And so that's something that you probably can wrap your head around, right? Because okay,
Good
fine,
analogy.
sure, maybe you're going to that place because you want to experience the culture and all that other stuff, right? But if you're sitting there and you're feeling a little uneasy because there's so much different, and okay, well, there's that person that might bring that little sense of normalcy, at least a shared language, even if
Right.
you don't have shared interests, you may have a shared language. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here is that like we at least understand baseline terminology and things like that amongst each other, right?
Good.
So.
Yes, that's an excellent analogy.
Yeah, my brain works in analogies. Like whenever there's like a foreign concept for me, I usually just try to figure out like, okay, well, how do I relate that to something else? And so that may be helpful for a listener. I don't know.
Yeah.
If not, so be it. But all right, let's move on to your book that you wrote. So again, the title is "Changing Your Feeling: A Workbook for Anxiety and Worry from a Christian Perspective." And talk to us about the book, kind of where the idea for this book came from, and something that maybe the military veteran listeners could take away from the book and apply in their daily lives.
Well, the idea from their book just came from, I was doing a lot of counseling for anxiety and worry. It's probably one of the top things that come into my office, people come into my office for. And so I was saying a lot of the same things, and my clients will say this too, that I say a lot of the same things. But that's how life is, right? We say a lot of the same things.
Sure.
So, and just having friends come to me and things, like I was like, it'd be great to just have all this written down. And I was kind of just trying to do a little bit of like maybe a little small booklet on coping skills. But as I was working through it, I kept adding. I'm like, oh, I think this would be helpful. I think this would be helpful. And it just became a whole workbook. And I like workbooks because I think sometimes we can read a book and we'll take in the knowledge, but we won't necessarily apply it. We'll know what to do, but we won't actually do it. And workbooks give us that opportunity, at least the way I created mine, to actually apply the knowledge and to work it out and practice throughout the week or whatever as the case, as the section may lead. So they actually have to do the work. So they have to be a little motivated.
Well, and I think that's an important piece of it too. As you're talking, the light bulb went off in my head that, yeah, sure, you can read a book, get all the greatest ideas in the world. It can solve all the world's problems in through reading the book, and you'll know maybe even exactly how to do it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the motivation to do it.
Right.
And so when you are in a situation where maybe you're depressed and you're struggling to find the motivation to even get out of bed and put your clothes on and take a shower, brush your teeth, those types of things, going and applying these things that you read in a book that's going to be a big ask for somebody, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have at least the motivation to open up this book, right? Okay, well then that's step one, I think. You know, like let's take little baby steps, right? Take step one, and then okay, well there's a little bit of work that you might need to do. Okay, well start doing some of that work, and then as you're doing that work, I think part of what you're saying is that when you are physically doing something, maybe it's writing in a workbook or whatever the case may be, however the workbook is laid out, you become more invested in it and more motivated to want to see it work, right? Not to say that people don't want to get the benefit of whatever book that they might have read, but you're invested in it because you've already spent some time and energy doing. Not, I mean, I know reading is a doing thing, but you're creating something, right? If you're writing in a workbook, those are your thoughts, your ideas, your whatever it is that you're putting in there. That's on you. And well, great that author wrote this book and had, you know, a nice publisher who put it out there in the bookstores and Amazon and all these other places. But this is me. I'm making this book mine now by putting in my information, my ideas and everything. And that's going to make it a little bit more of a motivational tool to want to see that work because you've already invested some time and energy into it, right? And I think that's the idea behind having some sort of workbook, you know, whether it's like yours or I know there's others like it out there, you know, that for different areas of people's lives that you know you might want to improve. But that's, I think, kind of the idea that maybe the psychological you know, reason behind why those work better than you know, just reading a book, right?
Right. I think so. I think that, you know, when you're in a book, and this, I read books all the time, so I'm not ditching books in general,
Sure.
but when you're working on a specific thing and trying to get that thing out of your life, it is because books can go from idea to idea to idea. And so you're just kind of reading along. When you have to stop and actually look at and think about and apply what it says, that does make it a little bit more, or you a little bit more accountable to actually do the stuff. If in there, like, because I kind of have it laid out like how counseling sessions would go. So the first part is like setting your goals. Those are your personal goals. What does, if you want to reduce anxiety or anything in your life, what does life without that look like? And so that's going to be different for each person. And then an assessment of where you are right now. What does that look like, and where are some areas that you can improve? Because some things might be really good for some people and not so good for others. So it's hopefully just laid out in a way that can be very helpful for people to work through, make it personal, and then apply as they move through. So you do have to be a little motivated. Again, that does take some motivation, just like going to counseling. Like you have to be willing to do the work, and that is always the hard part. So if you can get that part, you're, you know, most of the way.
Well, I mean, and part of it is just showing up. You know, even for therapy, you know, in counseling, when you walk in the door, that's sometimes a big battle that people have to overcome. And you know, just getting in that door, hey, chalk that up as a success. You've done something positive towards, you know, improving your mental health just by showing up.
Right.
And then, yeah, okay, fine. Maybe that first session isn't really taken hold, but you know, as time goes on, that it becomes easier to show up. And then, okay, now we can start to see some of the benefits of doing it. And then, yeah, sure, there's maybe some homework that you might need to do depending on the type of therapy that you're going through and all that type of stuff. But that all of that is motivation, right? And it's, I think, easy, kind of to your point, why, you know, you chose to go with a workbook as opposed to a just read it book. I think, for me anyways, when I've read a book, it's easy for me to read that and be like, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me, so I'm not going to do that, you know? Whereas if I am writing down my goals, my what does the next year look like? What does what does good look like in my eyes? Well, now that's me. I can't say no. Well, geez, that's not me. Well, of course it's me. I wrote it. So it's a good point of view to have. Now, your book takes a Christian point of view from this. Tell us how it's maybe different from some other workbooks or other points of view that maybe doesn't include a religious aspect to it.
Well, it's probably the same if you take the religious part out of it. It is because it is psychology based in that I use cognitive behavioral therapy as my foundation, and there is a lot of that in the Bible also. And so that's why I integrated it specifically for Christians to speak that language and give them a foundation of this is how God wants us to work this out. Now, the workbook might be kind of hard to pull out the religious aspects and just have people go through. I mean, you could, depending, but, coming to counseling, I can, just speak the cognitive behavioral language without the faith aspect. But
Sure.
I really, faith is how I view the world. So, yeah, that's, that came natural just to write it for Christians specifically struggling, because those were people that were calling me a lot and feeling shame about feeling anxiety and just negative thoughts in general. And I really wanted to help them with the foundation of the Word of God and psychology and blend those together to help them just walk a life in more freedom.
Well, and I think it's important too that you pointed that out, because in a therapy session, yeah, sure, you could remove some of the more religious language from the conversation and just stick strictly to the psychology of what it is that you're talking about. Obviously, in a book, it's gonna be a lot harder to take the black and white words off the page and remove the way it's written. But I think that's the point of it, is it's written for a particular type of audience. Okay, this is written for, from a Christian perspective. And so if that's not you, okay, well, that's not you. That's fine. But I think the important part is that, that the people who do identify with that, they're able to, maybe wrap their heads around, from a biblical perspective, why is it that maybe I feel the way that I feel, or that I'm acting the way I'm acting, or doing the things that I'm doing, and how do I make the positive changes, the way it basically talks about in the Bible, like you were saying, right? And so, so I think that's kind of an important perspective to have, with that workbook, is that's basically what it's written for, is from that Christian perspective. So, what would you say, maybe are some of the more common struggles that people typically are grappling with, especially on the veteran side, and how do you deal with those types of issues that you might see?
Yeah, I see mostly, and this is probably across the board, but military members, especially trauma, of course, and that can look different. It's not all combat. Some of it's other kinds of trauma within the military, but also anxiety and depression. And normally the trauma is kind of the trigger that brings some of that stuff to the surface. Sometimes they can have it without it, but sometimes even a smaller, I don't know if that's a great word, trauma can bring up a lot of these other things, like something that, we call it little T trauma and big T trauma. But basically, sometimes just any kind of traumatic event that happens can just bring out the anxiety and the depression. So that's, and I work basically the same with those, and it really depends on kind of what they're experiencing, of where we go and how, like the route that we take. So maybe we just work on reducing symptoms of anxiety first and then go back as they get some coping skills that then they can work through the bigger trauma that kind of exacerbated the symptoms. So that's kind of where we go.
Yeah, and from the folks that I've spoken with, I've started to kind of piece together some little pieces of, where people are experiencing the different types of trauma that they've experienced, and of course, a lot of them, being military, combat is a big thing. Other things, related to their military service are big areas where they've experienced traumas. But to your point, oftentimes that trauma just kind of digs up stuff from under the surface that maybe they experienced years and years ago that they may just have forgotten about, and they just figured out how to deal with it, but it's kind of bubbled back up to the surface. And now, not only are they dealing with the trauma of combat situation that they were in, but now they're also dealing with this trauma from sometimes even decades ago, where now you got both of these things that you're trying to figure out how to deal with. And a lot of times in their mind, the combat is the thing that needs to be fixed.
Right.
But oftentimes it's also that thing from years ago that also needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And I wonder if can they be tackled simultaneously, or is it something where you might want to isolate your approach and start let's just talk about that thing that happened years ago, or let's handle the thing that's happening now, the more recent combat trauma, or is there a combination of things? How does that typically work in your environment?
Yeah, it really kind of depends on the trauma and like what's going on with them specifically. Sometimes, like if it's a loss of a fellow soldier or something, that can bring up a loss that they experienced way when they're young. I mean, as therapists, we always try to go to the youngest memory or traumatic memory to kind of help them work through that. And that's normally the best place to go. But, if there was none of that and they have just, their vehicle exploded or like whatever's gone on, like something really traumatic. I mean, I like to work on coping skills first, because you have to go back in the trauma to work through the trauma, and that can be very hard if you've got no coping skills. That's why a lot of people will drink or use drugs, because they're trying to cope with all that stuff. It's hard and it's big, but there is healing for it. It just takes a lot of courage to kind of walk back through that with somebody. So that does take a while to get, because you want to build some trust with them. You want to make sure that they have enough coping skills to do that. And then anything else that's hindering their kind of walking through that, you want to make sure that you deal with all those other things, because you don't ever want them to feel unsafe as they did when they actually experienced the trauma. So
Sure.
you don't want to re-traumatize.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I've heard of situations where that has happened as well, and that's like you said, that's not where you want to be. You don't want to be doing that type of thing. But something you brought up is that a lot of times people will self-medicate, drugs, alcohol, things like that, because that's the only thing that they know that makes them feel any better at the time. And I think we know now that that's not a good long-term coping strategy, but not even a good short-term coping strategy. It's overall
It works a little bit short-term. That's why people do it.
Right.
It's just got very bad, consequences.
But
normally.
then that leads you down that hole, that bad hole of, well, it worked last time, so let's do it again. And hey, well, now let's do it again and again. And eventually that short-term becomes a long-term, and that's not a great place to be, right?
A whole new problem, yeah.
And so, and it, unfortunately, it's a common thing that we hear about is people just abusing drugs or alcohol because that's all that they know. Is there anything that we can look out for in the military, the veteran community, to help recognize when mental health help is needed? Hopefully before it gets to that point where the drugs and alcohol become a problem. Ideally, but even if they have become a problem, are there things that, like, signs that we can look out for, things that we can pay attention to that will help us identify whether or not this is a candidate for some sort of mental health help?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I always ask, one, if people have experienced trauma or something difficult, like if they're drinking or doing something else that's not helpful, and are they doing it as a coping skill? So if you're like, drinking in and of itself isn't bad, but if you're using it to make it through the day, or to quiet the memories, or to feel decent, or to just quiet the sounds, like, that is not good. That we need healthy coping skills, and I'd consider that an unhealthy coping skill. And so that is one thing to look to, is like, why am I doing this behavior? Now, we can trick ourselves and go, no, I'm just doing it, because I enjoy it. So it will require a little honesty of ourselves to go, why am I doing this particular behavior? And it isn't just drinking or doing drugs. It can be shopping. It can be eating. It could be gambling. There's so many things that are in and of themselves aren't bad, but if we're doing it to cope with something, then we know that's not a helpful thing to do. We want to cope in a healthy way and not cause even more problems. So, yeah, that would be a good for someone to be honest with themselves. If someone's just looking in, I would say, if people are having, or if they're doing things or not doing things that are impairing their life somehow, that's always a good thing to look for too. So am I only getting arguments with my spouse when I drink, or am I, just, getting in trouble at work, or not going to work, or, and this can be with anxiety or depression as well. Like, how's it affecting my life? Because some people can manage, they'll have depressed feelings, but they manage it and learn how to work through it and still can go on with their life and it doesn't impair. But if you're staying in bed a lot and missing work, or isolating from friends, like, those are some signs that it might be an issue to work on, and not just let those things happen, because they get worse. There's no getting better by just ignoring it. Like, you have to do something if you want it to be better, because it certainly can.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought some of those other things up that you were talking about. In addition to drugs, alcohol, there's things like shopping, or other things like that, or gambling, even other kind of risky behaviors that you might be doing, speeding on the highway, or, like trying to get that adrenaline rush going, but doing things that are stupid dangerous, not like, skydiving, where it might be safe. You have a parachute, right? You're not just jumping out of an airplane wishing for the best,
Right.
you got a plan in place, right? And but when you're speeding down the highway, like, there's a lot of things that are out of your control, other drivers and things like that, that's just stupid, and it is going to put other people or yourself in serious danger. And so when you're doing these things, and to your point, that are affecting your day-to-day life, that's probably a good indication, right?
Right.
And another thing that you brought up is being honest with yourself. And I know when I got back from Afghanistan and we had mandatory mental health screenings, my primary goal was just getting back home to my family. And yep, no, I'm doing fine. Check all those boxes that say I'm doing fine, and get me out of here. That was my mindset. But long term, that wasn't very beneficial, because I didn't get the help that I needed early on, and it made things worse because I was that person that you were talking about. I was drinking too much. I was not functioning very well, and I was fumbling through every day, and it was just not. It was I was kind of a wreck,
Mm-hmm.
and had I gotten the help early on, I could have avoided all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wasn't being honest with myself, or the other people who were asking the questions, because they're not sitting there asking these questions because they have nothing else to do. They're asking the questions because they actually care, right?
Because
And
it's impairing your life,
yeah,
or
and
some way,
they want to provide you with this help and support, and whether you think you need it or not. I mean, give it a shot, anyways, right? And who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you discover something about yourself, and maybe you're not quite as good as you thought you were, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
you realize, hey, I really did need that help.
Mm-hmm.
And worst case scenario, waste an hour in an office, and you find out, okay, yeah, no, maybe I actually am okay. But as far as I'm concerned, my mindset about all of this has completely changed from when I came back, because I just wanted to be done with it and get out of there, versus just investing a little time
Right.
and getting my mind right, so I didn't have to rely on drinking, and it just didn't help, So, but I know there's probably family members out there too who, or loved ones, people who care about these people, right? Who are struggling, and oftentimes other people can see it before we see it ourselves. Oh, I'm
Mm-hmm.
fine. It's just a couple. I'm just having a few extra drinks tonight,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. I'm
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. I'm staying out late and I got to work early in the morning, but I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I do
Mm-hmm.
it all the time, and a little extra coffee in the morning, I'll be just fine. That type of
Right.
mentality we often have with ourselves, but our family members maybe can see it in us, or even coworkers or friends, or whoever. They can see it in us that it's like, no, there's actually something not quite right there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you have any advice for those folks who are maybe outside looking in to the situation, who might be struggling with understanding, first off, the emotional issues that they may be having, but also how can they help encourage them to get the help that they might need?
Yeah, it is really hard for a family member to watch, your loved ones struggle with things, especially when they're in denial, and most of the time, I mean, that's one thing that our mind is very little tricky thing. We can make it think whatever we want, which is good, but it's also bad because we end up justifying a lot of behavior.
Mhm.
When, if I would say definitely bring your concerns to the person, because they're not going to know unless you actually say something. And that's for the person having the hard time. It's important to listen to your family members, because if they're saying something, that probably means there is an issue. Um, and I would also encourage them, they may need to get some support around them and not be quiet about that, because that sometimes can make the person with the veteran also start having their own issues. So it's important to at least
Yeah.
get support. But they can educate themselves. There are like lots of resources on some different veterans and military sites that can help. I'm not a big fan of just Googling all sorts of diagnoses, because sometimes we just want to stick a label on people and not actually just work on the symptoms of that. Um, and it's also important when we're trying to help a family member deal with some of those things, is to also let them experience some of the consequences of their behavior. Like, we're not to call into their job and tell them, oh, they're sick today or something. Like, they do need to experience some consequences, because normally we don't change or are motivated to change until we actually experience some consequences to our behaviors. So if
Yeah.
a family member is just trying to protect them, like, I get it, I understand, and I'm like a mom, like I totally get the protection aspect of like we don't want them to fall and hurt themselves. But at the same time, sometimes that's the most important thing that you can do is letting them experience those consequences. That's not easy. That's why you need support around you, that people can speak truth and things into your life so that you can be strong and brave. And I would just say to military members or veterans, you know, here's one of the things I say a lot. It takes strength and courage to go to counseling, to walk in, to say, I need help. That takes a strong person to do that.
Sure.
And the military is made up of strong individuals. They were willing to give their life for their country. That makes you strong already. So I want to say to them, you are strong. You have the strength within you. Don't let fear make the decision for you, but you choose strength and courage and to reach out for help if you need it. We aren't meant to do our walks by ourselves. And that's why people find healing when they can go to someone else or even walk beside someone else or do a program or be in a group or whatever that takes. That there's healing in that. And there's a reason for that, because we can't do everything by ourselves. There are some things we can do by ourselves, and some people have managed some traumas by themselves. That's great. But if you're not doing it well, you might need to just reach out to someone and know that that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're strong.
Yeah, and I think, to just kind of putting this together in, maybe another analogy that might help people wrap their heads around what you're talking about, is that there are so many things that we rely on other people for in our day-to-day lives. I do not have a green thumb to save my life. So if I want fruits or vegetables or any of that, I need to go to the grocery store. Well, there's people at the grocery store who stock the shelves and all that, but there's people who drive the trucks from, wherever the produce came from to the store. And then there's people who grow the food that I eat. And those are the people, that we all rely on, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't cut my own hair because I don't want to look like a clown. I don't do my own car maintenance because I'm not good at that either. And now, to your point, there are a couple things I could do. I can change, I can change my windshield wipers. I could change, I could do tire, type things. I could do certain things with my car. When it comes to the engine, I don't have a clue. So, yeah, I might be able to manage with some stuff. I can't manage with everything, though. So if my car starts making this funny noise, I'm going to have to bring it to the mechanic to have the mechanic check it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think anybody's going to look at me like, oh, my God, what a psycho. Like, I can't believe you would bring your car to a mechanic. You wouldn't just drive it around with that funny noise all the time. Come on, right? No, that would be crazy, right? And yes, could I learn how to do that? I could. But then I'm not doing the other things that I need to be doing, right? I have a job, and to learn how to become a mechanic, that anyone who's become a mechanic, they know that takes some time to learn all that stuff that they've learned. I don't have time for that, so I'm going to need to rely on somebody else to do that. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the food example that I gave too. Like, I might need to have some food tonight for dinner. I don't have time to learn how to grow it right now. It's not going to grow in the next, 8 hours or so before dinner time. It's just not going to work. So yeah, I'm going to have to rely on somebody so I can go to the store and get my groceries. So we rely on people in so many different areas of our lives. Mm-hmm. We rely on other people. And when it comes to something as important as our brain and what we have going on up there, we're like, you know what? The heck with it, I'll figure it out. I'm stronger than that. I can handle it. Yeah. Like, it's not about being strong or weak or anything. It's about doing what you need to do in order to get the end result that you're looking for. I want a car that doesn't have a squeaky noise. I want food on my table tonight for dinner. I want my thoughts to not be so intrusive. I want, that memory that keeps replaying in my head not to take control of my life.
Right.
I want to not have to drink every single night just to be able to fall asleep. Why not go talk to somebody and get the help?
Yeah.
Is it embarrassing? Well, I don't know. Is it embarrassing for me that I don't know how to grow vegetables in my garden? I don't know. Like it's not. I don't have a problem admitting that. I don't have a problem admitting that I have to take my car to a mechanic.
Right.
Just suck it up and deal with it. If you feel like it's embarrassing, like it's not that big of a deal. Nobody's sitting there judging you.
Well, nobody has to know except maybe your spouse and the
Sure.
counselor that you go see. But think about the military in general. Do we do anything on our own?
Right.
I mean, it is all together as a group.
Yeah.
So you think like that is part of how we just do life anyway. We don't do it by ourselves. We do it with others. So you can pick your others wisely. In the military, we don't have much of a choice of, who's there. But we do when it comes to our healing, like where we're going to get that, who we're going to choose to walk beside us. And we choose somebody that's trustworthy and knowledgeable, that encourages us and gives us hope and enables us to think, I can do this.
Sure.
Because whoever's out there struggling, who hasn't reached out for help, I promise you, there is healing on the other side. You can get there. Just don't do it by yourself, because that's not the military way.
No, exactly. No,
We
and,
wanna
and
do
you,
it
that's
together.
a very good point too, because even from day one of basic training, you had a battle buddy that you did everything with. You went everywhere with that person. Like you couldn't even go to the bathroom alone.
That's
like,
right. They knew where you were at all times.
Yeah, exactly. Like you had some. There was someone showering right next to you. Come on, if you
Yeah.
if you weren't embarrassed by that, come on.
Then you can do
You could do anything. Right?
That's right. and that's always my, like, I want to instill hope in people, because I do believe everybody can be healed from whatever that they have gone through or whatever they're struggling with. Healing is there. It just takes a little route that maybe you don't necessarily want to go, but to know that it is there, you can live life without, like, all the things that you mentioned, like that's achievable. It's actually, I'm not just making that up. Like, people
Yeah.
can walk through the hardest of things, and find healing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hear stories of people who've experienced some outrageous things, where the odds were stacked against them, and there were, 100 guys coming after them, and it's like 100-to-1 kind of battle or something like that, and they somehow miraculously survived. And I don't know, that would do a number on me, I'm pretty sure, but they still figured out a way to come out on the other side of that. Or they were blown up and lost a limb or multiple limbs, and couldn't see the purpose of living life without these limbs. And then all of a sudden they, something switched in them, or somebody helped them see a way to make that switch in their mind, and now all of a sudden they're like, that was the greatest thing that could have ever happened to me, and they're living their best life now. And so if those people can do it, to your point, to give hope to people, if those people can do it, why can't you? Why can't anybody who's listening to this right now find some sort of strength or inspiration, or see that little shimmer of light at the end of that tunnel? Maybe a long tunnel you have to go through, but at some point that light's going to start getting brighter, and eventually you'll see that all that hard work does pay off. And just like hard work with anything, when you look back on it, something you can be proud of, right?
Right. So tell me, Scott, how therapeutic has been doing a podcast been for you?
I kind of joke sometimes with people, and I do want to get into your podcast as well. So maybe we'll flip the script here, and we'll ask the same question that you just asked me. I'll ask it to you. But For me, I joke with people sometimes that I kind of do this podcast a little bit selfishly because I get a little bit of benefit because I get to talk to different people all the time. I get to hear their perspectives and their thoughts and ideas, or what they have done for their therapy. And sometimes it's not your traditional go to a therapist, sit in the office, talk about your thoughts and feelings and all these other things. Sometimes, it's people going surfing or riding a horse or,
Exactly.
going, playing paintball or something. I don't know, just something that helps them. And these things for me, it's like, okay, well, there's not any one path that people take. Sometimes they may take one path and then they veer off to another path because that one path, while it was good, it served its purpose. There's something else that's maybe better, might be more helpful. And so it's really opened my mind to all the other possibilities. Because before I started the podcast, as far as I was concerned, if you needed help with your mental health, it was you and a therapist, and that's it. That was your option. And if that wasn't working for you, well, I guess you're out of luck. And that was where my mindset was. But then, through talking to all these different people, because I had an open mind, I said, obviously it's, we look at the statistics and the 22 veterans a day who take their lives, if that's even a correct number. I don't know, what the actual number is anymore, but, so many people are doing that. And if all of them had gone to therapy or all of them had done, something, there could be a lot fewer of them. And so for me, it's been beneficial because I get to hear the other side of the story and listen to other people's perspectives, thought processes and things like that. And sometimes it's inspirational too, where you hear somebody who they went through some of the most traumatic experiences you could imagine. I had a guy on a few episodes ago where he experienced a skydiving accident and broke his neck, and he was paralyzed and thought he was going to die, didn't end up dying, wanted to die, then realized, man, life is going to be great. It's going to be different, but it's going to be great. And learned to walk again and all these things. It was, to me, like, that was super inspirational.
Yeah.
And this guy had gone through so many other things too. Like, for the listeners, if you haven't listened to that, go back and find that episode and listen through it. It was such a inspiring episode. It was Gary Pacelli was the guest on that episode, but go listen to that episode. It was really inspiring. But for me, just hearing other people, I think has just been incredible and helpful. For me and my own healing. So yeah, I kind of do it a little selfishly too.
Well, it sounds like there's several components that podcasting has helped, and it is therapeutic in the sense because you're doing two things. You're listening and hearing other people's story. That helps us be emotionally healthy as we listen to other people's story, but also as we serve other people too, because your podcast is of service, and as we serve or help others, that is therapeutic for us also. And then I heard you say that's also like a coping skill. Like, it is something that brings you joy and something that you enjoy doing. It probably does make you feel very refreshed and restored after you do one. That's helpful too, that we can look to things to bring that into our life that does bring us joy or that we enjoy doing. And if it's got the aspect of listening to others or serving others, then even better, because you're even making a greater impact. So that's awesome. So I guess I did ask that because that's important, that we can all integrate something. It doesn't have to be a counselor, but something that's therapeutic for us. It can still help us heal, but it is something outside of ourselves too that does include other people. But also, it helps us feel good. We like it.
And for someone like me, so this is going to probably sound weird because I host a podcast. I'm talking to people all the time, but I'm very introverted. And so get putting me in big crowds with lots of people, or even just talking like in a group of people where there's multiple people around it, I kind of just like shut down, and I'm done and I'm out. But one-on-one I'm good. And for short spurts, like we're talking, it's going to be roughly an hour or so that we've been talking. I'm good with that. Even if it went a little bit longer, I'd be good with that too. And then I get to recharge after that. Like I kind of need to kind of decompress, recharge, and kind of just be by myself for a little bit, and then I'm good. Versus, like if I was to go to a group therapy session where there's 10 or 15 other people in a in a room, no thanks. I just wouldn't do very well in a situation like that. So, so it's I think it's ultimately finding what works for you,
Exactly.
and just following that. And so, hell, go start a podcast if you want.
That's right.
and maybe it's just grab some friends and start talking and record it and see what happens. Maybe you don't even put it out there. It's just getting people together and talking. And one of the the COVID situation was, I don't think anyone wants to go through that again. But one of the great things is is kind of introduce people to all this video technology where you can have conversations with people. I've talked to people all over the world doing this podcast, and I would never get a chance to talk to people like that had this technology not existed. This podcast wouldn't probably exist. We likely wouldn't be talking either, because it would just be too difficult, too time consuming, costly to have these conversations. So that's another thing that I find a huge benefit from, is being able to talk to people from all over the place.
Yeah, that's awesome. COVID did bring some good things.
Yeah.
Well,
talking about podcasts, let's talk about your podcast. I mentioned it in the intro, the Healthy and Redeemed podcast. What can listeners expect from it? What can maybe help them in their healing journey and their mental wellness, all that kind of stuff? What can they get from that show?
Well, I just started in November 2024, so it's very new.
Sure.
And anything to do with emotional, mental, or spiritual health is my focus. So I want people, and especially Christians, to be healthy. And it's very obtainable. So I talk from how to be emotionally healthy to coping skills to I just did a little series on changing our thoughts, learning how to change our thoughts, because that is really the key to changing our life, I believe. So I'll be talking about lots of stuff going on. So
excellent.
I like to help people, and I like to chat. I am an introvert also. I did broadcast journalism as my undergraduate degree, and so I always wanted to have a radio show. And so talk about doing something that brings some joy to your life. That, of course, I have integrated kind of the counseling aspect with the podcast. But, wow, how neat that I don't have to go ask a radio station to do a Healey show.
Right.
I could just create my own.
Well,
I hope people listen.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I think is so great about podcasts is like literally anyone can do it. You don't have to have any fancy setup or equipment or anything like that. You can record your own voice or other people on your phone, and that's pretty much all you need. You just got to be able to publish it out there, and there's some free services out there that help you get your episodes out there. But like that's pretty much it. Like you don't need much else. You don't need a whole radio station with radio towers and professional equipment and all that kind of stuff. And
working a certain shift and all that stuff.
Right. And that's the other thing too that I like about it is it's not live. Like right now, for the listeners, I'm going to clue you in on something right now. It's January 18th. This episode's not coming out until the end of March. We don't have to be live right in that time slot, where now you need to be available when my show is on and I would need to be available when somebody else's show is on. Like that's not the way podcasting works. And it's great because it takes so much stress out of it. Because if I'm sitting here and it's like, okay, well, the show's starting and, it's been a couple minutes and guess it still isn't here. So that makes it so much more stressful. And I probably wouldn't do it because I wouldn't enjoy it anymore. It would just
Right.
it'd be too stressful, too much of a drag, especially if the guest didn't show up. Then it's like, what do I do? I got to talk for an hour to fill space, right? And that to me just doesn't seem appealing. And so, for me, another benefit of the podcast is that it's available, easily available for me to put stuff out there, but it's also free for the listeners to be able to listen to, so long as you have access to the internet, which pretty much everyone does nowadays. Even if you have to go to a library or something, you can still access the internet and figure out a way to, get access to these episodes. So, I think that's the best part of it is just it's freely available to everybody.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's one thing I thought too as I was like sharing information on my podcast, because it's just me. I don't do interviews or haven't yet, but just sharing information that I feel like why do counselors have to keep all this information to themselves? Why can't they just share out there? So if
Yeah.
somebody does want to change, I'll give homework on the podcast. So if somebody does want to change their mental health, then they can tune in and hear like, just like a counseling session, but it's not a counseling session, but you can get a
Sure.
lot of the same information. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's similar to a lot of podcasts that are out there where like a business may be talking about their industry or whatever. Sometimes you got to give a little advice, and that might just plant the seed in somebody's head that what, this is the thing that's right for me, and that will help them along their way to get that service that
Right.
you might be talking about, whether it's
Right.
mental health, some sort of counseling or whatever the homework assignment is that you provide. That may just lead them down that road and plant that seed a little bit, so that they now can feel a little bit more comfortable that this is going to be the thing that's going to help me, because maybe that little homework assignment that you gave was just enough to give them a taste, and now they go to their therapist in their neck of the woods, and that person is able to now harvest that, whatever that seed had been planted, and do something beneficial for those people, and you're able to reach far more people with a podcast than you can one-on-one, individually. I'd never be able to talk to every single person who's listened to my podcast individually,
Right.
and speak with every single one of them. It'd just be so time consuming. But being able to put this out there in that kind of format where everyone can listen to it, it's just incredible. So
Yeah.
before we wrap up this episode, can you let people know where they can go to find out more about you, your books, your podcasts, and the services that you offer?
My website is writtenbyhealey.com. There I have like a ton of resources, free resources for people who are interested in certain topics. You can learn all about me, the books that I have written. What else is there? Yeah, some spiritual resources. So there's all sorts of things. If they're interested, if they're in Arkansas and want counseling, my website for that is hopelifecounseling.com. So, but they have to be in Arkansas. I could do online if they're in Northwest Arkansas. Obviously, they can see me there.
Excellent. And again, that's just another thing that I think has really improved the mental health field, is the ability to do that virtual counseling. Understanding that you got to be in the same state a lot of times, same geographic region, for licensing purposes and that type of thing. Understand that. But for you were saying this earlier, for people who don't want other people to know that they are going to see a therapist, well, you can do this in your car,
That's right.
not while you're
I do
driving,
lots of
obviously.
sessions in the car.
Yeah, but
I'm not in the car, but they are.
Yeah, no, for sure. And
Yeah.
so like you're by yourself and nobody can hear you, or they don't know what you're doing. You could just be
That's
on
right.
on the phone with your plumber for all they know. And, you know, that's, you know, all that you really need to, you know, worry about. And so you can do this on your own, you know, not having to physically be in the same location. You can use that virtual, and I've used virtual, and it's worked great, for many different sessions that I've done. And, and, you know, honestly, I think it's just a powerful tool. So it's great that you have that option. And so I will have those links that you mentioned in the show notes for the listeners to check out. And, you know, hopefully they get some great information from your podcast, from your books, and possibly even if they're in your area, also the counseling services as well, if that's what they're looking for. But I do want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show, sharing your insights, your expertise, and you know, the different resources that you shared with us. And I think the biblical principles that you incorporate into the practices are really beneficial for those who are, you know, of a religious, you know, coming from a religious background, in helping to promote mental health and their overall wellness, spiritual, mental, you know, all these different things all come into play, and I think it's really important. So thank you for all the work that you do, and thank you for taking the time to come on.
Thank you for having me so much.